Hello, students. We are going to continue on in our Chapter 5 lesson 2 notes, Uniting the Colonists, and we left off at Crisis in Boston. So we are going to preview our question here. Number 1, why did Parliament pass the Tea Act? And I am going to read under Crisis in Boston. The British East India Company was vital to the British economy. Colonial refusal to import British East India tea had nearly driven the company out of business. To help save the company and protect the British economy, Parliament passed the Tea Act. It gave the company nearly total control of the market for tea in the colonies. The Tea Act also removed some, but not all, of the taxes on tea, making it less expensive for colonists. Yet the colonists remained angry. They did not want to pay any tax, and they did not want to be told what tea they could buy. So we've got our answer here. Why did they pass the Tea Act? So first of all, there's something that was called the British East India Company, and this was a company that marketed tea. And so let's see here. Here we go. To help save the company and protect the British economy, because this is a company that brought a lot of revenue, incoming money to Great Britain, they created the Tea Act. So to save the British East India Company, which I will abbreviate as the BEIC in some other places, and to protect the British economy is our answer. So what was the Tea Act? Here we go. It gave nearly total control of the market for tea in the colonies to the company. So this allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the shopkeepers and bypass the merchants who normally distributed the tea. That's a piece that's not in the textbook, but this was a piece of this act, this law, that's going to really make colonists more angry because it's bypassing colonists who want to also make money distributing the tea to the shopkeepers. One important thing that I also am going to ask you to add into the margin or wherever actually is that this is not a tax. And that's something that is a lot of times confusing for students, that they always want to say that this act is a tax because so many of the acts are a tax. This one is not. This actually removed some of the taxes on tea, but the biggest part of the law here was that it was giving control to the British East India Company to market the tea. So basically, they were creating a monopoly here, meaning that it was only the British East India Company that was able to sell and distribute tea. And if nobody else can do it, then that also means the British East India Company can charge whatever they want. And if colonists want it, they're going to have to pay that amount of money. I'm gonna highlight this another color here. I'm actually gonna just make that bold, that it is not a tax. And with some of these events, remember, we're putting in dates that you're going to need to be able to work on a project that will be coming up. So here we're also going to add in that the Tea Act was passed on May 10th, 1773. So please add that into your notes. And you can put it over there in that margin part where the question is, or you can add it right into the answer box as well. You might want to highlight your dates in a different color or maybe make them bold so that they stick out to you, because you are going to have to go back and find these dates later on when we're doing our project. So that was a lot of information, but hopefully you had time to do that. I'm going to kind of get myself moved forward here a little bit for our next question is how did the colonists react to the Tea Act? So we actually have a few different things that were going on, but I'm going to continue to read. Colonial merchants called for a new boycott. Colonists vowed to stop the East India Company ships from unloading. The Daughters of Liberty issued a pamphlet declaring that they rather than part with their freedom will part with our tea. So we first of all have a new boycott. That seems to be a form of the protest that is helping in the cases of getting taxes repealed or canceled. So they have a new boycott on tea. They also said that they were going to stop the British East India Company ships from unloading their tea. And then lastly, we have the Daughters of Liberty, who said, rather than part with freedom, we'll part with our tea. So they're sort of taking the stance against that even though tea, again, is this drink that everybody drinks, and it's the easiest thing for them to keep maintained, that it doesn't have to be kept cold. It can be drank hot or cold, that this is the drink that they have, that they would still rather not have tea than part with freedom. They want to have these rights, as they should. And so also, again, remember that the Daughters of Liberty are a group who's also created to protest British policies. It was made up of women, though, right? The Daughters of Liberty. And they also use more passive ways of protesting. So them putting out pamphlets like this one saying, we want you to act with us. We want you to not drink tea. I'm going to get my text ready here for the next part. So then we're going to move into a tea party. And number one, what did the Boston Sons of Liberty do to the British East India ships in the harbor? So we're going to read. Despite warnings of trouble, the East India Company continued shipping tea to the colonies. Colonists in New York and Philadelphia forced the tea ships to turn back. In 1773, 3 ships loaded with tea arrived in Boston Harbor. The royal governor ordered that they be unloaded. The Boston Sons of Liberty acted swiftly. At midnight on December 16th, colonists dressed as Native Americans boarded the ships and threw 342 chests of tea overboard. As word of the Boston Tea Party spread, colonists gathered to celebrate the bold act. Yet no one spoke out against the British rule itself. Most colonists still saw themselves as loyal British citizens. So they're still thinking of Great Britain as their home and their country, but they are not happy with these laws and policies that are being put into place. So they are going to stand up against that and protest. That's, the way that representative government works, which is what they're trying to push for to have in the American colonies, because of course they have a monarch in Great Britain. So the Boston Sons of Liberty, what did they do to the ships in the harbor? They gathered together and at midnight, here we go, they dressed as Native Americans, boarded the ship, and threw 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. So there's a couple things about this. First of all, everybody knew that it was actually the Sons of Liberty who committed this act. Nobody was fooled by their disguises of Native Americans. And I'm going to actually show you a couple images in a moment where you can clearly see that they're not Native Americans. But they did want to sort of hide their identity a little bit. They knew that they would be identified as Sons of Liberty, but maybe not identified personally or individually. And so, of course, if they can stay anonymous, it's going to help them greater. And then also they're not going to be arrested if nobody knows who they actually are. So again, they weren't really trying to make people think that it was Native Americans, but they wanted to hide their identity a little bit. So to give you an idea here of what we're talking about, the 342 chests of tea, I want to show you a couple things. First of all, I want to show you what tea actually looked like at this time. It's not like what you know tea today, where you have little individual bags of tea that you put into a cup when it's hot, or maybe if you make iced tea, you put it into a big pitcher, you put a whole bunch of them in there. And it didn't look like that. So here's an example. I know it may be kind of difficult to see. I'm going to put it up here as close as I can. This is a brick of tea. Okay. Now, this is not an original brick from back in the colonial times, but it is a replica of one that one of my colleagues bought for me years and years ago at a museum. And so it kind of looks like a chocolate bar, right? It has these different segments. But this is actual tea. I could brew this if I want to. Now, I wouldn't because I've had it for many years. But also notice that after many years, it has not broken down at all. This is still intact for the most part. However, I have touched it many, many times over the years. Some of my students have touched it over the years. So it's not something that I would want to actually be putting into my cup to drink. However, I can smell that it smells like tea as well. And usually if you were here in my classroom, I would walk around with this and I would let you smell it if you wanted to see if it really smelled like tea. So you could know that it was actually a brick of tea. Now on the back side, again, I'm going to put this up as close as I can here, is an emblem. And this is an emblem of the British East India Company that was on the back of this brick of tea. Now, the reason why they have it into segments is because now I would take this and I would break it just like you would like a Hershey bar, a chocolate bar. And then I would take that part of the tea and I would put it into my hot water or in my big pitcher of water, whatever it was that I was using to make. Now, I don't know how much tea each little segment makes. I don't have that information. But this to me seems like quite a bit of tea. So I would think it would make a lot. But again, I'm not totally sure on that. Okay. So that is what a brick of tea looked like then. Now we're also going to add into our information a couple interesting facts. And that is the chests are actually still in the bottom of the Boston Harbor. Now the tea is long gone, right? Because it actually kind of dissolves when it's put into water. And of course, in the harbor, it's going to float out into the open sea. So it's the tea itself is not there anymore. However, the chests are still in the Boston Harbor. The 342 chests of tea equal 92,000 pounds of tea, 46 tons. Okay, this is a lot of tea. And this would have cost millions of dollars. And so today it would be even more what it was costing them at that time for them to destroy this tea. So now this event is known as, of course, it has that kind of up in the title there, the Boston Tea Party. And it took place December 16th, 1773. So once again, you probably want to highlight or make bold the date or make it another color as you are putting this information in so it kind of sticks out to you later on when you go back, or maybe underline it, something so that it's easy for you to find when you go back to look for this information. So I am going to give you a moment there to make sure that you have that information, and I am going to kind of get ready for the next part, except for I actually have some images that I wanted to show you first. And I also do have some video clips that I'm going to play for you as well when the lesson portion is done. Oh, and I actually realized that the next question, I'll just kind of talk about that. It still came from this paragraph that I already read, and it said, how did the colonists react to this act of defiance? So here it says, as that word spread, colonists gathered to celebrate the bold act. And I'm going to kind of show you that as well when we move on to the next couple pages that have images on it of the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so here is one image of the Boston Tea Party itself. So you can see that the men on this ship are wearing feathers on their head to try to make it seem as if they are Indians, but Look at their clothing. They're still wearing regular colonial garments. So clearly we know that these are not actually Native Americans. And they're throwing the chest into the harbor. They're sinking into the bottom. It's going to take a little while for it to kind of like fill up with water and sink to the bottom. Also notice the crowds here on the docks. This was not the case because this took place at midnight, right? So people didn't actually know what was happening unless they were part of the Sons of Liberty. And then, but this is just trying to show how the people supported the Sons of Liberty for destroying the tea in the harbor. Okay, so there's one image of the Boston Tea Party. Now here's another image of the Boston Tea Party, again, a little bit closer up that you can see the men on the ship and they're dumping the tea into the harbor. Now, again, notice that many of them have feathers or headdresses on, but they're also still not very disguised, right? Look at most of their clothing. Again, this is not the typical garments that Native Americans wear. So we know that it wasn't really Native Americans. It was the Sons of Liberty dressed as the Native Americans. Okay, so our answer here was that what I just said before, they celebrated it, but they still weren't ready to talk about independence from Great Britain because most of them still see themselves as loyal British citizens. They don't like the policies and the laws, but they want them to be fixed. They don't necessarily want to break away from Great Britain. They just need some changes to be made. And so that's what they're going to still try to focus on here. As you're typing that, now I'm going to move forward here, and we're looking at the intolerable acts. And our number one question is, why did Parliament pass the coercive acts? And I'll talk about that here in a couple minutes of why we kind of have two different things. So when news of the Boston Tea Party reached London, King George III realized that Britain was losing control of the colonies. He declared, "We must either master them or totally leave them to themselves." In 1774, Parliament responded by passing a series of laws called the Coercive Acts. Coercive describes actions meant to force someone to do something. These laws were meant to punish the colonists for resisting British authority. One coercive act applied to all the colonies. It forced the colonies to let British soldiers live among the colonists. Massachusetts, though, received the harshest treatment. So we're going to stop there because that is going into part of question number 2. So why did they pass these acts? It says these laws were meant to punish the colonists for resisting British authority. So because you did something that we don't like, we're going to punish you for it. So remember before when we talked about how Great Britain is kind of like mom and dad, they're the parents, and the colonists are the kids. Now you broke a rule. So mom and dad are going to ground you. They're going to punish you. And here's how they're going to do it. And so the intolerable acts were put in place because they thought that they were losing control of the colonists. So they wanted to punish them for those who resisted British law. And especially they wanted to punish Massachusetts for the Tea Party. So remember, MA is Massachusetts, right? We all remember our abbreviations for our colonies, Massachusetts. So I tried to put rules in place for you, right? As your parent, as your mom, and you disobeyed. You went against what I put in place. And so that makes me feel like I don't have control over you. And that may be the case. But now I'm going to show you my authority by giving you a punishment, by grounding you, okay? And so that's what's happening here. And so some of the laws that were included in the coercive acts, so these are some of the laws. Now, there are other laws as well, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on. And in this paragraph, it tells us that coerce or coercive means to force someone into doing something, okay? So you wouldn't do it when I asked you to, so now I'm going to force you to do it, and I'm going to call my punishment the coercive acts. So the first punishment that was given to all of the colonies is here, that they forced to let British soldiers live among them. And this part of the act was called the Quartering Act. So it's a law within a law. And it forced the colonists to provide shelter for the British soldiers in their homes or in tents or in barns on their property. It also had to provide, it also said that they had to provide bedding and candles and beverages for these soldiers. So now, not only are soldiers stationed around the colonial cities, they might be in your home, watching you all the time, using your property, and you are also providing things for them. Let me give you a moment to make sure you get that information in there. I'm going to actually continue to read here because that's going to give us our next answer here. One of the coercive acts banned town meetings in Massachusetts. Another closed Boston Harbor until the colonists paid for the ruined tea. This stopped most shipments of food and other supplies to the colony. Parliament was trying to cut Massachusetts off from the other colonies. Instead, the coercive acts drew the colonies together. Other colonies sent food and clothing to support Boston. So once again, the punishment that the parents are trying to put in place on the children are not going to actually do what they're meant to do. It's only going to make the kids more adamant against the parents in this situation, okay? So our second thing is that it banned town meetings in Massachusetts. So they were taking away the rights to have these meetings. And remember, this is specifically focused on punishing Massachusetts. The second one is that they closed the Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for. And so that meant no food, no supplies, no people coming in or out through the through ships, by ships. The fourth one that we're going to focus on is not in the text. So we're going to just add this one here, that custom officers were to be tried in Great Britain for their crimes. Now, the reason why they did this was because a lot of times these custom officers are of the people, right? So they might turn away and let things slide by. Or as they did their routine checks, they, again, maybe take bribes for things. And so they are going to be given a harsher punishment if they are tried in Great Britain, if they go on trial in Great Britain. And so that would be a guarantee, basically, that they would have a harsh punishment. And these acts, now remember, they're different laws, they're laws within a law. So this is the date that we are going to be using. If you were to look this up on the internet, if you Googled this, you are not necessarily going to get this same date. So this is the only correct date that I am going to accept for the coercive acts, because some of them were put into place at different times. But I want to make it as simple as possible. So this is the date that we're using, March 31st, 1774. So again, highlight it, underline it, make it bold, change the color, do something so that it sticks out for the coercive acts. So our next question is asking, how did the other colonies respond to these new laws? And I already made reference to this, and that instead of actually cutting off Boston, it drew the colonies together. They supported Boston. They started providing things to Boston by bringing them in other ways. Because they couldn't get shipments in by ship, they started bringing them in on land from other colonies to help them out. And so we're going to move on. Hopefully you have that information. Remember that you can go back later on your own to get anything that you miss. So they showed their support for Boston by sending food and supplies. Our last question here in this lesson is, why did the colonists call these laws the intolerable acts? And so I'm going to read the last paragraph. The colonists believe all of these new laws violated their rights as English citizens. They expressed their feelings about these laws by calling them the intolerable acts. Intolerable means painful and unbearable. Or you think about intolerable is that you cannot tolerate it. Okay, so officially, these acts are called the coercive acts. That's what Parliament named them. But remember, we talk about things from our own perspective. So the colonists called them the intolerable acts because they felt they were unbearable or unreasonable or unfair. They could not tolerate them. So once again, colonists called them intolerable. Great Britain called them coercive. So you do need to know the difference between those two. And I'll give you a moment to go ahead and finish typing in that information. Okay, and that is the end of our lesson 2 information.